The hostility, the unwillingness to work together. So turbulent is like a uncontrolled, in practical terms, it's uncontrolled flow of something like air or water. So they're really a people that are uncontrollable. They have an absence of individuality. For for most of the early history of Arabs, the individual had no place in the world. They had no life of their own. The common language of the Bedouins, who we'll get into, offered no way to express the concept of individuality or spirit of the person. Instead, the clan defined the mental universe, and the people lived in a tight-knit kinship group. The patriarchal families were formed by a father, a son, and the families grouped into clans. So really, there was no life outside the clan or the family, and you were identified by that clan. There was no individual, there was no individuality as we have in America. And their gods were established in that format as well. So the early Arabs were animists and polytheists. So an animist is really, people that are prone to assign the spiritual to inanimate things like, plants, animals. And they would also, similar to China and Japan, is they would worship their ancestry as well. So they were polytheists, and their gods were structured by family. So they were, Bedouin essentially means a traveler or a nomad. And so as they traveled, they would set up their shrine or their temples as they traveled. And those temples were, housed, the local gods of the clans. And that's just one part of the Arab tribes, the Bedouins. And they believed that the events, that all natural objects and events were living spirits who could be either helpful or harmful to man. They also believed that the universe was peopled with what they called jinn, or demons. So they had to be propagated, or to gain favor, or controlled and defeated by magic. By magical practices, the early Arab might determine his fate or coerce these forces to they had to coerce these forces because they had no sympathetical or personal relationship to these gods. So the gods were essentially separate from humanity. So they had to kind of coerce them or appease them in a way through magic. So that's kind of an introduction. So they're a people bound by language. They're polytheist. The majority of them are nomadic in nature, at least the center tribes. So there's not much cohesion in their early history. All right. Yes.
What do you mean by magic? like science that's not yet understood?
No, it's, through chance, through, burning incense. Um,
Sleight of hand.
yeah.
I always think of like Jafar. Or it's fine.
Um, some of it dealt with, taking mind-altering drugs, things like that.
Oh.
All right, so where does the word Arab originate from? So there's a debate among scholars what Arab actually means. Some say it means a disparate people joined or mixed together. So remember, Arabs in their early history are made up of a conglomerate of different people, different tribes. And then the second meaning is just a desert or nomadic people. Those are the two common definitions of Arab. Whoops. So according to Islamic historians, there was what they call mythical tribes that existed in Saudi Arabia prior to the 6th millennia, 6000 BC, which these two tribes are called Ad and Thamud. And so Ad and Thamud were referred to as Al-Arab, Al-Arabah, which means the true Arab. And then anybody else is considered Arab Muta Arabah, which is to be Arabized, or almost like similar to Israel. If you were a Gentile and you wanted to become Israeli, you'd be circumcised. So you would be, adopted into the nation of Israel. So that's what this means, Arab Muta Arabah. And so there's been strife within the Arab culture throughout history about who is the true Allah Arab, Allah Arabah, and who's Arab Muta Arabah. So even at one point in history, the original Arabs were assigned to be the false Arabs. So there's a lot of importance placed on these two positions. But according to the Quran, the tribe of Ad and Thamud were the true Arabs, and all other tribes that came after were classed as to be Arabized.
Now you got.
How do I get you confused?
Because I thought it was Ishmael was the father of the Arab people.
I didn't say they weren't.
Islam.
No. Well, we'll get there. So this is the origin of the word. So
Okay.
Arab is split into two, the true Arab and the Arabized Arab, or false Arab. I guess false isn't, it became false Arab, but it's really just a adopted Arab. I guess if you're not a true Arab, the opposite of true is false, but so one thing is clear, and that is that Arabs were not people. They were people who settled the first Fertile Crescent and the coastal Fertile Fringe, and the desert portion of Arabia These people did not originally consider themselves to be Arabs. They did not call themselves Arabs. Arabs was assigned to them by, as we'll touch on this, by outside nations. Scripture makes reference to the Arabs as early as Genesis 10. I'll turn there really quick. Let's see. I'll start in, so verse 1 is, here's the genealogy of the sons of Noach, Shem, which is going to come into play here, Ham and Japhet. These sons were born after the flood. And then, skipping forward to verse 6, the sons of Ham were Cush, Mizraim, Put, and Canaan. The sons of Cush were Shiva, or Saba, Havilah, Savta, Ramah, and Saphka. The sons of Ramah were, this is the one I want to talk about. The sons of Ramah were Shiva, or Saba, and Dedan. So Sheba, or Saba, is a Arab, or is an Arab, is an Arab, and I'll point that out here.
Settled in Southwest Arabia.
Shh.
That's what it says.
So the first, outside of Scripture, if you're secular, the first known written mention of Arab was by the Assyrian king Shalmaneser III, who left an inscription around 853 BC. And it mentions that he fought and defeated a Syrian-Palestinian coalition that was reinforced by the first known Arab, Gendebu, and his camel. So,
When?
853 BC.
How was it Palestinian?
Palestinians existed before then.
They weren't called Palestinians.
No, but we'll get into that because
We were
they
talking about the Phoenicians and the
right.
other guys in Gaza.
Yeah.
What the heck? Philistines.
Philistines.
Those were the original Palestinians.
Right, and we'll get into that as we talk about more of the other societies that make up Islam. So he makes mention of this guy Gendubu and his camels. So, and as we'll get into probably next couple weekends, we'll see the influence that the Arabs have in many of the warring nations throughout history, and they were a significant force within Assyria, and then as we'll read in Babylon as well. So Arab now has basically become a blanket term covering people of the desert and the sown and everything in between, as today's proportions of nomadic and settled Arabs is less than 1 in 100. So if you picked out one person out of a crowd of 100, the chance is that one of those people is of true Arab descent.
From the proper tribe.
Yeah, from that area, from Saudi Arabia.
From the Arabah.
And that goes back to, as I mentioned, their language became so popular that surrounding nations, as we talk about the Sumerians, the Persians, they they considered themselves to be the true Arabs. This is talk about Iraq and Iran. All right. So origin of the Arabs. So we talked about where the name came from, so let's talk about where the Arabs themselves originated from. So if you take the secular viewpoint, they migrated up from Africa between 125,000 to 45,000 years ago. They crossed the Sinai Peninsula, and some of them stayed in the Fertile Crescent, which is kind of the north. Do I have a map here? I do. I'll bring it up here shortly. It's the north portion of Saudi Arabia, as well as kind of the south around Yemen, and the lower western coast of Saudi Arabia. So some of the people stayed north, some migrated south, and then what became known as the Bedouins adopted or became acclimated with the central desert portion of Saudi Arabia. The religious description of the Arab's origin starts with Shem. Shem or Sam in Arabic. So who was Shem? Son of Noah. And that's actually where the term Semite originates from. It means you're a son of Shem. And you speak either Hebrew, Arabic, or what we'll be talking here shortly are the Sabian language. So that's why when news talks about being anti-Semite, it's not quite accurate. You know, Semite has been assigned specifically to the Jews, but it actually encompasses all Arabs, Hebrews, and Sabians. And it stems from being a son of Shem. So from Shem, you go draw a line to Eber, obviously, because he's a descendant. I think he's the second or great-great-grandson of Shem. And then from Eber, you go to Ishmael. So let me bring up my chart here. I won't be able to show you, but I can describe it to you. Maybe. I had it. Oh, here we go. So we'll start with Shem. So it goes Shem, Arpachshad, Salah, Eber, Peleg, Ru, Serug, Nahor, Terah, and then from Terah you have Abraham, and then through Abraham and who? Hagar is Ishmael. So all Arabs draw their lineage from Ishmael. Yeah, so Ishmael had Nebaioth, Kedar, Adbeel, Mibsam, Mishma, Duma, Massa, Hadar, Tema, Jeter, Naphish, and Kidima. 12 sons. So as the tribes of Ishmael moved south into Saudi Arabia, they settled into 3 general tribes. So the tribes here are kind of set up as I'm pointing out here. You have the northern tribes by Petra. You have the central tribes, which populate most of the desert, the Bedouins, the desert portion of Saudi Arabia, and then you have the south Crescent, which is the Sabians.
Yemen and Saudi Arabia, right?
So the Sabians, we'll start with the southern tribe first. Might be Sabians, I may be saying it wrong. So the south region is the Sabians. Sabians. Okay. The Kindab Bedouin tribes are the central desert portion, and then the Hawazin. And these are just the major tribes. There's obviously a lot of sub-tribes within there. All right, so the southern tribes were different than the Bedouins in that they were highly urbanized. They were highly advanced in engineering. They were agricultural in nature. They were masters of irrigation. And then within the tribes of the Sabaeans, you have the Minians, the Quatabanians, Hadramis, and Himyarists. But we're going to focus on the Sabaeans. So, so Scripture mentions the Sabaeans in multiple places. I just picked out a couple here. So Joel 3:8 says, "I will sell your sons and daughters to the people of Judah, and they will sell them to the men of Sheba, a nation far off." So remember we read about Sheba in Genesis 10, Saba? So that is the Sabaeans. Same people. Yep. So that's Shiva or Saba. Ezekiel 27, verse 22, the traders of Shiva, or the Sabaeans, and Ramah exchanged the best quality spices, all kinds of precious stones and gold for your goods. The merchants of Shiva brought you in exchange for your goods rich clothes, cloaks made of blue material and embroidery. So that kind of gives us a little insight in what their economy was. So the southern tribes, as I mentioned, were highly advanced in engineering. They developed one of the most successful civil engineering works in human history, which was the Merib Dam.
600 BC.
Yeah, in 600 BC. So this dam thwarted the Wadi Sad waterway, and it, as I mentioned, it reaches its final shape in 600 BC. So they were a people, agricultural people. They were masters of irrigation. Their main agriculture was dates, barley, grapes, millet, and wheat. And I'd be interested in seeing how they set up their barley. I don't know if you've ever driven through, where was that in Idaho? Remember we saw all those barley fields? But barley grows vertical, so what they do is they set up a bunch of posts and they run string like 10 feet up. And so you have whole fields with strings, posts and strings. It's not even a vine. It's a straight shoot, right? Is what it looked like.
Was that barley? I thought that was hops.
Yeah,
Oh, that
are
was hops. Okay. All right, never mind. Yeah. It
Because
all,
then hops grow in clusters.
yeah,
Full, and they are a vine,
yeah,
but a big fat
that's right,
vine.
big cluster, yeah. Oh, it all tastes the same when it's fermented. Tastes good.
Amen.
What's millet though?
Millet,
Is that like a type of grain?
yeah, yep. I had it here. It's like, I don't know if you've ever had couscous. It's similar, but it's a bigger grain. You don't like couscous? It's good.
Tastes like paper.
What do you know?
Couscous, you don't like couscous.
I do like you wanted a lot of
So the
He said goose, right?
so the Sabaeans were were polytheists, whose chief god was Ilmaquah, God the commander, and whose temple was at the capital Merib. So that's a present day image of the temple, what's left of the ruins of their temple. Merib is. Do I have that up here?
You'll put your map on the other side.
Yeah, I should, huh? It's not shown here, but Merib is south here. Yeah, by Yemen.
That sounds familiar. Read enough spy books. All that sounds familiar.
Yeah. So they had a central, unlike the Bedouins, they had a central worship, central temple dedicated for the worship of Ilmaquah. And so all the surrounding southern tribes would come and pilgrimage to Merib to worship this god. They also had other gods, sun god, the god of love, the god of war, so they were very similar to other nations. So the southern tribes were what's called Shab. So instead of being identified by their individual tribes like their neighbors north, they were identified by their territory. And their temple for their god had an assigned location. They had a central leader who was called the Mukarib, whose role was the unifier. He was sanctioned by their god, Ilmaquah. He would carry out divine treaties, or what also were known as Habal, or binding covenants. So the term Habal is later used all throughout the Quran, as one verse says, "And hold fast all of you together to the Habal of Allah, and do not be divided among yourselves." Binding covenants made by the Makarab were, this is not in the Quran. The binding covenants that were made by the Makarab could be both political and theological. So he was essentially both their political and religious leader. So as we'll get into next weekend when we talk about the Bedouins, there's a large contrast between how their society functions and how the Bedouins function. So the South by itself would not have taken Islam beyond the Arabs because of how unified they were and how little they traveled. But without the example of the unity of the South, Islam would have also not went beyond the Arabs. So it's like by coincidence, the way that the two societies functioned, the Bedouins and the southern tribes, was a key component in the spread of Islam. Did I go back? I did, didn't I? And then their economy, as we briefly read in Scripture, in Ezekiel, the Sabians excelled in creating dyes from shellfish, but their most valued commodity that was sought after by the Romans, the Assyrians, the Greeks, were pearls. And they excelled in the export of frankincense, which is a gum from the Boswellia tree, and myrrh, which is gum from the Commiphora myrrha tree. And in fact, I think we read a few months ago in pastor's lessons, the Queen of Sheba made the exact trek from the south of Saudi Arabia, from Marib, to visit King Solomon to bear these gifts of aromatics, so frankincense and myrrh. So they were experts in trade, and they excelled in their primary commodities were dyes, fine clothing that were dyed by these dyes they make, and aromatics, like frankincense and myrrh. So that's the southern tribe. I'm out of time, so we'll get into the Bedouins next weekend. So this is leading up. This is all pre-establishment of Islam, and then we'll get into when Muhammad comes onto the scene. Any guess on what tribe Muhammad's from? Bedouin.
Is that the true one?
Yes. So this all comes back to the language, the High Arabic. That's what they really define the true Arab. Okay. So a quick review. The Arabs are essentially unified only through their language and their turbulent relations with one another. They are made up of mixed people that eventually, between 800 BC and leading up to the turn of the, going into AD, they were separated by, three major regions: north, central, and south. Their societies each had their own unique ways of living. And then the south and the north were very similar in that they set up a king. They were urbanized, except the north was more influenced by, obviously, because they bordered, many of the major nations that came about: Assyria, Rome. Any comments or questions? Sorry if it's a little dry. I find it interesting, but
No, it's good.
it's good. I like, the book I'm reading is completely secular, but it's cool to find, things that they've concluded in the history of the Arabs that also appear in Scripture, when Scripture's motivation wasn't, obviously researching the history of the people. It's just, this is what happened. So it's neat to see that correlation. Okay, that's all I got.